Mr. Secretary, earlier this month, you announced a plan to change the name of 3 Virginia military bases to restore the names of Confederate-era generals on those bases. You researched to find brave American soldiers with the same last names, Lee, Hill, and Pickett, who had not fought for the Confederacy and declared that those Confederate adjacent names would be restored. The problem is that you had to strip away the names of 4 amazing people that the Pentagon and local communities had chosen to honor at the Virginia bases. Why did you decide that these 4 patriots were not worthy enough to have their names on a base?
Well, Senator, as you know, this was never about the names of the bases they were renamed to.
So you don't challenge the worthiness?
Restoring all bases to their original name, because we're not about erasing history.
Okay, you don't care about their military record. You wanted to restore the Confederate names. When you called the Gregg family to tell them that their dad's name was no longer going to be on the base, what was their reaction?
Senator, the Army notified them of that.
You didn't call any of the families, and I've spoken with the families, and the families were called by the press. That's how they learned about this. They learned about it from the press. You didn't call the Barfoot family, the Gregg family, and you didn't call the Adams family.
What's up, everybody? Major Retired Richard Ojeda here. And why did you decide that these 4 patriots were not worthy enough to have their names on the bases? That was the question that set the tone for the absolute spanking session that followed.
I told the families I'd ask you about this today. In fact, 2 of General Gregg's granddaughters, Avery and Sydney, are right here in the audience, and I want to ask you this as I close. While you announced that these brave men and women's names would be stripped from the Virginia bases, no orders to that effect have been received by the base commanders. In light of the patriotic service of Van Barfoot, Arthur Gregg, Charity Adams, and Mary Walker, I'd like to ask you simply not to issue the orders changing the names of these Virginia bases. These families, my Commonwealth, are very proud of these heroes, very satisfied with these names, and ask you not to change them. Will you honor these exemplary patriots and keep their worthy names in places on the bases they loved and where they served?
Well, Senator, we very much thank and appreciate them for their service, and we'll find ways to recognize them, but the orders will soon be going to those bases to change the names back to the original name that never should have been changed.
But you have the power to not send those orders. They haven't gone out yet, correct?
Thank you. Senator, your time has expired.
In a recent Senate Armed Services hearing, Senator Tim Kaine absolutely tore into Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth with a line of questioning that lit the signal-using bootlicker's pants on fire. The topic? Hegseth's decision to overturn already approved, already celebrated base renamings, ripping off the names of 4 American heroes to bring back Confederate generals. Bases that had long carried the names of Pickett, Lee, Hill, and Bragg, men who fought against the United States, were changed to honor agreed-upon U.S. military heroes.
Van Barfoot, he was a Mississippi native, Mr. Chair, who came to Fort Pickett in the early 40s to train for war. He fought all over Europe in World War II. He won the Congressional Medal of Honor for his bravery. Leading his platoon in southern Italy, he killed 10 of the enemy, captured 17 more, and escorted 2 wounded Americans 1,700 yards to safety under enemy fire. Stayed in the Army for another 34 years, seeing action in both the Korean and the Vietnam Wars, and being assigned as the Army liaison to the Virginia National Guard at Fort Pickett. Long after he retired, he maintained his tie to the fort and to the Virginia National Guard. I was at the naming ceremony, where this base, to which he had devoted much of his life, was named in his honor. His family was there, and they were so proud. Arthur Gregg served in the Army for more than 30 years, first African-American to reach the rank of brigadier general, first to reach the rank of lieutenant general, began as an enlisted, eventually decided to become a commissioned officer, went to Fort Lee for quartermaster training, quickly rose through the ranks as an instructor, even though he was not allowed to go to the officers' club because of the color of his skin. He finished his career in 1979 as the director of all Army logistics operations around the world. He stayed near Fort Lee in retirement, raised his family there, and was a continuous beloved presence until his death last summer at 96. He was actually at the renaming ceremony with his family in 2022 at this place that meant so much to him. Charity Adams. Charity Adams was an Army officer during World War II, the first African-American woman allowed to join the WACs. She was the commanding officer of the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, a unique battalion composed primarily of African-American women making sure that American GIs in Europe got their mail during World War II. Our colleagues Jackie Rosen and Jerry Moran successfully passed a bill in 2022 giving the 6th 888 the Congressional Gold Medal. Charity Adams was the highest-ranking African-American woman in the military at the end of World War II. Her family was at the dedication of Fort Gregg Adams, named in honor of these two trailblazing logistics leaders. They were so proud. Finally, Mary Walker, the only woman ever to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. She graduated from Syracuse Medical School in 1855. She tried to join the Union Army as a surgeon, was turned away because she was a woman. But the need was so great, she eventually got hired at a military hospital in Washington and then was deployed as an Army surgeon with the Army of the Cumberland and the 52nd Ohio Infantry, becoming the first female surgeon in the U.S. Army. She served all over Virginia, including the place where the base is now named after her. She frequently crossed battle lines to treat civilians and even treated Confederate soldiers. She was captured a prisoner of war in Richmond until a prisoner relief president, Andrew Johnson, gave her the Congressional Medal of Honor after the Civil War.
And remember this, when the MAGA faithful praise Hegseth for his cruelty, it's like giving a toddler an award for not eating paint chips off the wall. They give him accolades for doing the bare minimum. It's absolutely pathetic that this moron keeps getting a free pass. What's infuriating about this whole situation is that these names weren't just thrown out there. They were chosen through a formal bipartisan process, signed, sealed, and celebrated by their communities. Families were invited to renaming ceremonies. There were speeches, dedications, pride. And yet Pete Hegseth wants to toss all of that out and bring the Confederacy back to the front gate. And the brain-dead Trump faithful are eating it up like ducks on a June bug. Why? Because they're undereducated and hate the same people that Donald Trump hates.
I'm somewhat puzzled. I grew up in Virginia where Robert E. Lee was revered. I think when I was a kid, his birthday was a school holiday. But as I grew older and learned more about American history, I learned that he fit the classic definition of a traitor. He took up arms against his country. He broke his oath as a member of the United States Army, which he took upon entering his career at West Point. Why are you going through these incredible gymnastics, finding current soldiers or other soldiers to rename? And you slipped a minute ago. You said we're returning these bases to their original names. Robert E. Lee, leading general of the Confederacy, Pickett, the other names. Why are you doing this? I don't understand what the motivation is to rename bases for people who took up arms against their country on behalf of slavery. What possible motivation can there be for this? Who is telling you to do this? Who is urging you to do this?
Senator, the veterans and service members across the country who have deployed from Fort Bragg or Fort Benning or Fort Hood or Fort Pickett, there's a legacy, there's a connection to those bases and to those places, to what they trained for there, what they did for, and what they came home back to. That matters to them. Ask enough of them, as I do, all the time, before and later. And we recognize the service of those who were put into the replacement. No one's disputing that. I would never dispute that. What we're looking at is erasing history, erasing names, erasing base names that service members are tied to.
It's not
Talk to people that serve at Bragg.
Recognizing
Ask people that
history.
serve at Fort Bragg or Fort Benning if they like the fact that the names have been returned. And to a man and to a woman, they will tell you, thank God we're back to Fort Bragg, and thank God we're back. And thankfully, because so many men and women in this country have served, there's a Benning and a Bragg and a Pickett and a Hood has a Silver Star or a Medal of Honor that we could rename the base to because of the limits of what Congress allowed us to do. So this is something we've been proud to do, something that's important for the morale of the Army, and those communities appreciate that we've returned it back to what it was instead of trying to play this game of erasing names.
We're not erasing history, Mr. Secretary. We're recognizing history and recognizing that mistakes have been made in this country. The greatest of all was the Civil War, where people took up arms against their country on behalf of the institution of slavery. And to continue the practice of recognizing those people and honoring them by the naming of these bases is, I believe, an insult to the people of the United States.
Tim Kaine, like the rest of us, wanted to know why. Why erase 4 barrier-breaking Americans and replace them with the names of Confederate soldiers who fought for slavery? And in the end, Hegseth didn't give a real answer. He tried to hide behind the language of restoring original names, claiming they should have never been changed in the first place. But what came next was one of the coldest, most callous displays we've seen from anyone claiming to support our troops. And here's where it gets cruel. When Senator Kaine asked Hegseth if he had personally notified the families of these heroes, Barfoot, Gregg, Adams, Walker, the answer wasn't just no, it was worse. Hegseth shrugged and said, the Army did, except they didn't. Tim Kaine exposed the truth. The families found out from the press. No personal call, no handwritten letter, no briefing, just cold headlines. And if that doesn't remind you of the trauma during the Vietnam War, then maybe you didn't pay attention. Back then, the war was so overwhelming, the casualties so frequent, that telegrams were delivered by taxi drivers, by mailmen, by Western Union carriers. No warning, no preparation, no dignity. You didn't know your son or husband was dead until a stranger showed up at your door holding a piece of paper. There's a scene in We Were Soldiers that captured that pain perfectly. Women collapsing in doorways, children watching their mothers crumble. It was so dehumanizing that military wives started volunteering to deliver the news themselves, because they knew what that moment meant, and they refused to let it be treated like a delivery route. And now Pete Hegseth is doing the same damn thing, erasing the names of military heroes and letting their families find out from the media. No dignity, no warning, just indifference. Because Pete Hegseth doesn't care. Not about service, not about sacrifice, not about the families who gave everything to this country. He only cares about his MAGA image, his Confederate cosplay, and doing what Trump tells him to do. And that's what makes this not just offensive, but absolutely unforgivable. And it wasn't just Tim Kaine. Senator Angus King from Maine dropped another truth bomb that Hegseth couldn't dodge. King grew up in Virginia, he said, where Robert E. Lee was revered, where Lee's birthday was a holiday. But as he got older and learned the truth, he realized what so many still refuse to admit. Lee fit the classic definition of a traitor. He took up arms against his country. He broke his oath as a member of the United States Army. Why are you doing this? Then he asked what we were all thinking. Why are you renaming bases after people who fought for slavery? Who is telling you to do this? Great question, right? And while we're at it, who do you think is telling Hegseth to pull other news channels off Pentagon TVs and replace them with Fox propaganda? Who's telling him to fire generals of color, to gut diversity, to erase history and then call it tradition? Is it Stephen Miller, the guy who once said America should only have 100 million people and they should all look like him? Is it some doomsday preacher with a tribulation chart taped to his fridge? No, we know who it is. Donald Trump. Trump and his Project 2025 loyalists want to rewrite history, gut civil rights, and fill every corner of the government with yes men who will erase every hard-won inch of American progress. This is not about patriotism. This is not about the troops. This is about power, racism, and obedience. So let's stop pretending this is about preserving history, because it's not. It's about replacing representation with erasure. It's about tearing down 4 of America's most inspiring heroes, people who broke barriers and made this country stronger, and replacing them with men who took up arms against it. And the person doing it? A Fox News flunky who leaks intel, whitewashes the Pentagon, and lets families of U.S. heroes learn from reporters that their legacies are being tossed in the trash. Pete Hegseth is not a leader. He's not a patriot. He is an unqualified coward in camo and a bootlicking worm. He should resign or be fired, and that is an absolute fact. Sappers clear the way, airborne all the way.